My name is Samantha Reed, and at 28 years old, at 3 a.m., my sister secretly grabbed my credit card while I was asleep. By morning, $11,000 was missing, used for a first class trip to Japan and expensive gifts with our cousin. A week later, she returned. Dad said, "Stop pretending she would never touch your money." I simply smiled because I knew it was the card she used. I woke up to the faint blue glow of my phone screen lighting up the nightstand. At first, I thought it was just another spam notification, but the buzzing wouldn't stop. Still half asleep, I reached over, squinting at the flood of messages from my bank app. 10, 11, 12 transactions, all between 3:07 and 3:28 a.m. At first, my brain couldn't even process it. $12,200 at an airline, $2,800 at some luxury boutique in Tokyo, $300 at a high-end jewelry store, and then a couple of smaller charges. If you can call $600 small at gift shops and restaurants I'd never heard of. My stomach sank. I shot upright, the cold realization creeping over me like ice water. I grabbed my wallet from the desk drawer. Empty. My credit card slot was bare. I didn't live with strangers. I lived with family. My younger sister, Claire, had been staying with me for a couple of weeks that had somehow stretched into 2 months. Supposedly, she was between jobs and just needed a place to crash. I'd been covering groceries, utilities, even her Ubers because public transport stressed her out, and now my card was gone. I stumbled down the hall, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs. Her door was closed, the faint hum of her phone charger the only sound. I knocked once, twice. Nothing. Pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. Empty bed, no Claire. I checked the kitchen, dark. The bathroom, empty. The front door, slightly ajar. By the time the sun came up, I had my answer. Claire's Instagram story, time-stamped 4:02 a.m., her grinning at the airport with our cousin Paige, both holding boarding passes. The caption read, "First class to Tokyo, baby. When life's too short, make it luxurious." My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. By noon, my bank confirmed the charges totaled just over $11,000. I froze the card, filed the fraud report, but the whole time, a deeper anger was simmering. Not just at Claire, but at the fact that I knew exactly how this was going to play out when she came back. And I wasn't wrong. A week later, she walked through my front door like she'd just gone for a weekend getaway, dragging 2 massive designer suitcases behind her. Paige wasn't with her, apparently still living it up in Kyoto. Claire smelled like expensive perfume and duty-free champagne. Before I could even speak, Dad, who'd come to pick her up, stepped forward, throwing me that disappointed parent look. "Stop pretending," he said flatly. "She would never touch your money. You've always been paranoid about her." I didn't argue. I just smiled, because I knew it was the card she used. To really understand why my sister swiping my credit card in the middle of the night wasn't just a one-time mistake, you need to know the history. Claire has been the family's untouchable princess since the day she was born. I'm not exaggerating. If she wanted something, she got it, no matter how reckless or selfish. And if anyone ever called her out, suddenly she'd become the fragile soul who couldn't handle negativity. Meanwhile, I was the designated responsible one, the one who made good grades without being asked, who got a job at 16 to pay for my own phone bill, who stayed out of trouble because I knew the trouble would land squarely on my back. Dad liked to call me steady, which sounds nice until you realize it was just code for, "We can take from you without worrying you'll complain." By the time I was 23, I was working a stable job in IT and had my own 2-bedroom apartment. Claire was 21 and already on her 3rd career path. She'd done 6 months of community college before taking time off to figure herself out, then tried cosmetology school before deciding beauty was too shallow, then quit a cafe job because management didn't vibe with her energy. Guess who covered her rent when she was between incomes? Guess who put groceries in her fridge when she said her paycheck got delayed? Guess who co-signed for her last credit card because the bank was being unfair about her history? Yeah, me. And here's the kicker. None of it ever counted as generosity in her eyes. It was simply what family does, which, funny enough, only seemed to apply when she needed help. 2 months before the Tokyo stunt, Claire called me crying at midnight. She'd had a fight with her roommate and needed a place to crash just for a couple of nights. I said, "Fine, I had a spare room." And despite every red flag I'd learned to ignore, I told myself it would be temporary. Night 1 turned into night 5, then 2 weeks. Then she started referring to my apartment as our place. The first time I saw her open my fridge and drink the last of my oat milk without asking, I knew I'd made a mistake. But the real warning sign came when I noticed packages arriving in her name. Expensive ones. High-end makeup brands, designer sneakers, stuff I knew she couldn't afford. When I asked how she was paying for it, she laughed. "Oh, don't worry, I've got it handled." Translation: she was racking up debt on some new card or running a tab she'd later expect someone else, probably me, to fix. Fast forward to the night before she stole my card. We'd barely spoken all day because I was working late on a project. Around midnight, I finally shut my laptop and went to bed. She was still awake, sprawled on the couch, scrolling through Instagram with Paige on FaceTime. Paige, our cousin, is Claire's partner in crime. She's the same type, used to comfort, expecting support, avoiding personal responsibility. Put them together, and you get a perfect storm of bad decisions. I overheard just enough of their conversation to know they were talking about getting away and living it up, but I figured it was just their usual fantasy talk. Claire had less than $100 to her name. She couldn't even cover her phone bill last month without borrowing from me. At 3 a.m., while I was asleep in my room, she walked in, pulled my wallet from my desk, and took my credit card like it was a pin she needed to borrow. Security footage from the apartment hallway later showed her tiptoeing out with her suitcase, meeting Paige downstairs, and heading straight for the rideshare that took them to the airport. When Dad told me to stop pretending she'd ever touch my money, it wasn't just ignorance. It was the same pattern I'd lived through for years. When Claire crashed Dad's car at 19 while texting and driving, he told her she was lucky to be alive and bought her a newer one because the old one had bad memories. When she blew $4,000 of her savings on a week in Miami, he said, "You can't put a price on life experiences." When she lost a retail job for skipping 3 shifts, he took her out for lunch to cheer her up. But me? When I once overdrew my account by $40 in college because my paycheck posted late, Dad gave me a 20-minute lecture about financial discipline and being an adult. So when I stood there, Dad staring me down and Claire smirking just behind him, I knew there was no point arguing, no point explaining that I had the bank statements, the timestamps, the Instagram posts. He wouldn't hear it. To him, Claire wasn't just innocent. She was incapable of being guilty, and I was the paranoid older sibling who needed to learn how to let things go. But here's the part no one in my family knew. That credit card she took wasn't just any card. It was a business card tied directly to my IT consulting side hustle, the one I'd been quietly building for 2 years. And it had security measures Claire couldn't possibly understand. The moment she tapped it for the first-class tickets, I got an alert, not just from the bank, from my own tracking system. Every single transaction she made after that was logged, geotagged, and backed up with merchant data that would make her head spin. In other words, I already had everything I needed, and I wasn't just going to get my money back. I was going to make sure this was the last time she or anyone in my family ever tried something like this again. A week after Claire breezed back in from Japan, the atmosphere in my apartment was radioactive. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just acted like she'd been on a quick weekend getaway instead of a 2-country, first-class trip funded by unauthorized charges. Dad still wouldn't let it go. He popped by every other day to check on her, which really meant glaring at me like I was the villain for being cold to his baby girl. That Friday, I decided I was done. Done with playing the person in the family who could always be relied on for financial help. Done with biting my tongue while Claire and Paige floated through life on other people's money. Done with Dad's blind devotion to his daughter. So, I set the stage. I told Claire I'd ordered takeout for all of us, her favorite sushi, the overpriced kind that makes you question if it's even legal to charge that much for raw fish. Told her Dad should come too, since we needed to clear the air. They both showed up right on time. Claire, in a silk robe and $900 designer slippers, the exact ones she'd bought in Ginza, Tokyo. Dad, in his usual jeans and polo, that disapproving frown already loaded and ready. We sat around my dining table, takeout containers steaming in the middle. I let them dig in for a few minutes before leaning back in my chair and saying, "So, about the $11,000 you spent on my business card?" Claire rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might fall out. Oh my God, you're still on that. I told you I didn't touch your money. Stop making up stories. Dad jumped in immediately. Enough, Samantha. We're not going to entertain this nonsense again. I smiled. Good. We're not going to entertain it. We're going to prove it. From under the table, I pulled out my laptop. I had already queued up the report from my card's tracking system. Every purchase she made, with merchant names, timestamps, and CCTV stills, from vendors who were more than happy to provide them once I explained it was part of an investigation into unauthorized transactions. The first image hit the screen. Claire and Paige at LAX First Class Lounge, champagne flutes in hand, boarding passes clearly visible. Time, 3:58 a.m. Dad froze mid-bite. Claire's chopsticks clattered onto the table. Click. Next slide. Claire swiping my card at Haneda Airport's duty-free store, arms loaded with luxury bags. Time, 5:12 p.m., Japan time. Click another. Her buying those exact $900 slippers she was currently wearing. You want me to keep going? I asked, my voice calm but loud enough to make Claire flinch. Dad started to speak, but I cut him off. No, you've been telling me to stop pretending all week, so let's get it all out in the open. I didn't just freeze the card. I filed a formal claim for unauthorized charges, which means the bank has already reversed the charges and the police have a copy of this report. Claire's face drained of color. You called the cops? You made purchases without my permission, I said flatly. On a business account, which by the way carries serious legal consequences, you made purchases without permission and jeopardized my livelihood. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Samantha, this is family. We don't bring in the police over family disputes. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Family? You mean the same family that has spent years placing a constant financial and emotional burden on me while defending her every screw-up? The same family that told me to stop pretending instead of believing me when I had evidence in my hand? Claire's voice cracked, the fake confidence finally slipping. I can pay you back. I leaned forward. No, you can't, because you don't have $11,000, and you won't, which is why you're going to pack your bags tonight and get out of my apartment. And you, Dad, I said, turning to him, are not welcome here until you can admit what she did and apologize for siding against me. Dad's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. She's your sister. No, I said, standing up, my voice rising for the first time. She's a grown adult who has been allowed to rely on others instead of managing her own responsibilities because you've never made her face consequences. Well, congratulations. She's about to. I slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a printed copy of the police report, the official case number from the bank's investigation, and a list of every transaction she made. If you think I'm bluffing, feel free to call the detective. His number is at the bottom. He's expecting your call. Claire's hands shook as she shoved back from the table. You're ruining my life. I stepped aside, pointing toward the door. No, Claire. I'm simply making sure you don't interfere in my life again. She stormed into the spare room to start packing. Dad stayed seated for a moment, staring at the envelope like it might explode. Then he stood up, muttered something about me being heartless, and followed her. As the door slammed behind them, I felt something I hadn't in years. Absolute, unshakable control over my own life. And I knew without a doubt this was just the beginning. For the first 24 hours after I kicked Claire and Dad out, my phone didn't stop vibrating. Claire started with texts. You're overreacting. You've always been jealous of me. You'll regret this. When that didn't work, she moved on to voice messages, half crying, half screaming. You've turned the whole family against me. Dad's so upset. He hasn't eaten all day. Good. Let him experience for once what it's like when someone else isn't providing everything for him. By the next morning, Dad himself was calling. I ignored him. Then came the guilt trips via Mom, who I hadn't even seen in weeks. Can't you just drop the charges? It's tearing us apart. She's your only sister. You two should be supporting each other. Supporting her? I've been doing that since we were teenagers. The only thing Claire had ever supported was her own bad habits. 2 days later, the real consequences kicked in. Detective Harris from the department handling financial cases called to confirm they'd formally contacted Claire. She had 2 options: pay back the full amount and sign an admission of guilt, or face charges. When I heard that, I expected a fresh tidal wave of begging from her. Instead, I got silence, which was almost worse. It meant she was scrambling. Sure enough, Paige called me the next morning. Paige never called me unless she wanted something. Samantha, she started, trying for that fake friendly tone. Claire's freaking out. If she goes down for this, she'll never get a job again. I let her talk for a solid minute before cutting in. Maybe she should have thought of that before carrying out that activity without permission. Oh, and Paige, if I were you, I'd delete that Tokyo photo dump before the police start asking how you paid for your ticket. The line went dead. That afternoon, Mom showed up at my door unannounced. She didn't knock, just walked in like she still had that right. Her first words weren't, "Hello," or "Can we talk?" "They're staying at a motel," she said. "It's awful. You've humiliated your sister." I just leaned on the counter, watching her like I'd never seen her before. Humiliated? "No, Mom," I clarified. "That's all. You could have handled it quietly." She said, voice trembling with that practiced mix of shame and disappointment, "Family matters shouldn't be public. They're only public." I shot back, because Claire made $11,000 worth of documented purchases without authorization. She wanted first-class treatment. Now she's getting it. Mom's face tightened. "Your father thinks you've gone too far." I smiled. "Your father isn't welcome here until he admits he was wrong. And if he keeps calling the detective to clear this up, he's going to find himself explaining why he was defending actions under legal investigation." That stopped her from continuing. Within a week, the family split into two camps. On one side, Dad, Mom, and the two cousins who'd always been glued to Claire's side. They painted me as the cold, ungrateful older sibling who had sold out her own sister. On the other, my aunt, my uncle, and a handful of relatives who'd been quietly watching this dynamic for years. They reached out privately to say they were proud of me for finally standing up for myself. Uncle Rob even admitted, "We all knew Claire was out of control, but no one wanted to be the first to say it." The final kicker came 2 weeks later. Claire showed up at my building, not to apologize, but to negotiate. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie, no designer labels in sight, and she looked small, almost fragile. "They're offering to drop everything if I pay you back in 6 months, she said, avoiding eye contact. "But I need you to tell them you're okay with it." I didn't even hesitate. "You can send the payments through my lawyer. I'm not speaking for you, and I'm not softening anything. You do this on the record, or you deal with the charges." Her jaw tightened, eyes glassy. "You're really done with me, aren't you?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Claire, I was done with you the second you took my card. This is just paperwork." She left without another word. 3 months later, the case closed. She'd scraped the money together through God knows what means, signed the admission, and the fraud was officially on her record. Dad hasn't looked me in the eyes since. And my life, quieter, calmer, richer. Not just financially, but in ways I didn't realize I'd been starving for. No more surprise knocks. No more loans that never get paid back. No more tiptoeing around someone else's entitlement in my own home. For the first time in years, the only person in charge of my money, my space, and my peace is me. It's been 6 months since the night I slid that police report across the table. Claire hasn't set foot in my apartment since. Dad still sends the occasional passive-aggressive text. "Hope you're proud of yourself." But the thing is, I am. For the first time in my life, I'm not living in damage control. I'm not waiting for the next emergency that magically only I can fix. I'm not budgeting around someone else's irresponsibility. And most importantly, I no longer feel guilty for putting myself first. Looking back, it's almost laughable how long I let that cycle run. Years of telling myself it was just this once, that it was easier to pay the bill than to start a fight. That family helps family, even when family is placing a constant financial burden on you. But here's the truth they never want you to realize. If you don't set boundaries, they'll keep moving the goalposts until you're unrecognizable to yourself. They don't stop because you've been generous. They stop because you've made it impossible for them to keep taking. And the moment you draw that line, they will call you selfish because you've cut off their supply. A couple of weeks ago, I ran into Paige at the grocery store. She froze like she'd seen a ghost. I smiled, said hello, and kept walking. She probably expected me to ask about Claire, to show some lingering curiosity. I didn't, because I genuinely don't care. Claire's record means she can't get certain jobs now, which I'm sure she calls unfair. She still posts on Instagram, but it's not first-class lounges anymore. It's thrift store hauls and cheap wine nights. Her captions are full of starting over quotes, but I know the truth. This isn't reinvention. It's reality finally catching up. I don't feel satisfaction in her difficulties, but I also don't carry the stress of them. Actions have consequences, and for once, they landed where they belonged. A few days ago, I was sitting on my couch, feet up, laptop open to my next big client contract. My phone buzzed. An email from the bank confirmed a $7,800 payment had just hit my account, the final installment from Claire. I stared at that number for a moment, then laughed. Not because I needed the money, I'm doing better than ever, but because it felt like the final nail in a coffin I'd been building for years. Not for Claire, for the old version of me, the version that bent over backwards to keep the peace, that confused enabling with love, that thought saying no was the same as betraying family, that believed my worth was measured by how much I could give before I broke. That person is gone. The new me keeps her doors locked, her bank alerts on, and her boundaries in place. I live in a space that's mine in every sense of the word, financially, emotionally, and physically. I've stopped explaining my choices to people who are only upset because they can't benefit from me anymore. And if Dad, Claire, or anyone else from that side of the family ever tries to test those boundaries again, I won't need evidence or a police report to shut it down. All it will take is one word: no. Because I've learned the most freeing truth there is. I am not their safety net. I am not their backup plan. I am not their last resort. I will never be their ATM. For the first time, I'm living for me, and it feels extraordinary.